was a Harvard and Johns Hopkins educated biologist, psychobiologist, and geneticist, who served many years as the director of the Johns Hopkins Psychiatric Clinic, where he served until becoming the professor of psychobiology in 1957. And he made many important contributions to the field of biology and psychobiology. But one of his most famous experiments involved drowning rats. A study in which today probably would land him in jail for animal cruelty. But he knew that rats had a reputation for being able to swim for exceedingly long periods of time, upwards of 50 hours being able to swim in one continuous turn. Yet when he placed rats in a tightly contained bucket of water, they quickly discovered that they had nowhere to go, nowhere to find relief, and they literally gave up, allowing themselves to simply sink to the bottom and drown, on average, within about 15 minutes. He knew they had the physical ability to continue swimming much longer, so he concluded they must have felt both helpless and hopeless. So he tried the experiment again. This time, he pulled the rats from the water once he saw them begin to struggle to swim. He let them rest for a short period of time and then returned them to the bucket. They once again began swimming, testing the limits of the bucket, but instead, this time of giving up and allowing themselves to sink and drown, they kept swimming and swimming and swimming. Many swam for up to 60 hours until their bodies could simply no longer endure. What was the difference between these two groups of rats? Richter concluded the difference was hope. That there was something to look forward to that would change their outcome. These drowning rats had been saved once. So they had in them, they had been instilled hope, expectation that they would be rescued once again. They now had a motivation to battle the fatigue, battle the seemingly impossible circumstances, and just keep swimming. Maybe here tonight, maybe you feel like one of those rats. You're swimming at your job, and it feels pointless. That you feel like you're going nowhere, and there seems like there's nothing to grab onto. You're just treading water. Or maybe you're in recovery. You've been going to the meetings and hitting all the expectations, but you wonder, am I just treading water, or is there something else? Maybe it's your relationship or your marriage, and it seems stuck. It seems to be on life support. And you wonder, could it get better than it is right now? In every case, your motivation is low. You might be going through the motions. You might be just trying to make it through the day. Maybe you're even struggling with discouragement and some depression. In all these cases, the natural thing that we tend to do when we're struggling is we turn and we focus on us. We focus on me. And in doing so, what we do is we lose our sense of purpose. Now, there are some times where we are deeply wounded. We need to focus on me. We need help. We need to deal with our trauma, or our depression needs professional help. However, sometimes I'm just in a rut. Sometimes I'm just so focused too much on me. And what I found is in the times where I kind of get wrapped up in me, is if I choose to become intentional about my day-to-day interactions with other people, if I choose to ask God to create opportunities for me to help me see people differently, take off my blinders, and look for others that need a word of encouragement or a place where I can help answer prayer, and it changes my outlook. I find purpose in those moments. So in this series, we're talking about how Jesus slowed down and he zoomed in on the one, often the one that was forgotten, the person who was in need. And that by doing that, he changed culture by seeing one person at a time. And that's what God's calling us to do as a whole. See the people that are right in front of us. No matter who you are, where you are, what your story is, this will give purpose and meaning to your life. Asking God to help you slow down, see the people around you, see their needs, and see what role you can play in their situation. What does that look like, though? Well, I believe that in the journey of every person's life, there are times where we come to intersections. Intersections of life. These are the spots in our lives where we get to where life can take us in one direction or another direction or multiple directions. There's where we have this opportunity to show up in other people's lives. I was reading a story by a writer named Elizabeth Sherrill. Elizabeth Sherrill is a Christian writer. She wrote in the Massachusetts area, passed away a couple of years ago, but she wrote more than 30 books and contributed to over 2,000 articles in magazines. And she tells a story one day that she was in her office writing an article that was due very, very soon when she noticed something strange in her backyard out her back window. It was a black and white animal wearing a yellow helmet. As she investigated further, she discovered it was a skunk that had gotten its head stuck in a yellow yogurt container. And as she watched the skunk wander around blindly, she thought, someone needs to help that poor animal. She continued to type her article because it was due soon. And she noticed out the window, there he was again, still struggling. And she thought, someone besides me needs to really do something about this. And then she thought, well, at some point he's going to wander off into someone else's backyard, and then they can help him. But he didn't. And it was then that she realized she was the only person in a position to really do something about this. So she Googled the number for wildlife control and called for help. When the man answered the phone, she said, there's a skunk in my backyard with a yellow yogurt container on his head. What do I do? The man on the other line said, ma'am, you need to take the yogurt container off of his head. She said what we're all thinking, what if the skunk sprays me? And he said, he won't spray you if he can't see you. Okay, but if I take the carton off of his head, he will see me. After a long period of silence, the man said, well, try not to make the skunk feel threatened. That was his advice. And so reluctantly, she did what she needed to do. Without thinking, she went into the backyard. She found the black and white wanderer. And she grabbed the yellow yogurt container off his head. And they locked eyes. For 10 seconds, they looked at each other, neither sure what the other was about to do. And that's when the skunk turned and ran off into the woods. I love how Elizabeth summed this all up. She says this was a timeless parable played out in front of me. The skunk was all the needs I was hesitant to participate in. Because it takes time to participate. And I have deadlines to meet. I'm busy. I probably can't do anything anyway. Somebody else can handle it better. Besides, involvement can be ugly. And the stench may rub off on me. All of this was true, she said. But I've got a yellow pencil holder on my desk, pretty scratched and broken, as a reminder that sometimes God's answer to a need is me. See, it turns out something's happening in your backyard. And you're the best person in the best position to do something about it. There are people in your life right now where you are the best person to impact that person. And chances are they're at an intersection. What are some of the intersections that are around you? You see a moving truck in your neighborhood. And a family is moving in. And for a short period of time, there's this window where they're going through change and uncertainty. And there's a chance to welcome them and make them feel like they're seen. Those of you in a recovery home, these moments come all the time. Someone made a brave choice, but a scary choice to take back their life. And you're there at that intersection. And you remember the time when that was an intersection for you. Or someone gets a health diagnosis. This person is now at the intersection of fear and suffering. And you have the opportunity to bring peace and comfort and the presence of God into their life. Maybe you have a friend. She's just recently split with her husband. It feels awkward to even bring it up. But she's at an intersection. It needs to be seen by someone. Now, we all have these intersections in our lives. And I mentioned this before without going deeper into the details. I had this time during COVID where I thought I was done with pastoring. I just wanted to do something else. And I was at an intersection where I could go different ways. There's a pastor named Jamie Shepherd. And truthfully, Jamie's a little bit older than I am, and I don't really know Jamie that well. But during COVID, he would call me at some of the low points, just to check in, just to pray with me. And at first, I took the call. I was thankful that he would call. And then I started letting it go to voicemail. It was during a time where I didn't really want to talk to anyone. And I stopped responding. And I always felt bad that I kind of just didn't respond. So yesterday I'm finishing up this message and I started thinking about the times where Jesus saw people. And I started thinking about the times that I felt seen in my own life. And I remember Gene. So yesterday I stopped my message as I was writing and I wrote him. And I thanked him for seeing me. Thanked him for being there with encouragement during the low points. Letting him know that I felt seen by him. And even though he may have felt like it was all for nothing, I wanted him to know yesterday that it wasn't. That I appreciated his care and concern. Someone needs you, even when they don't respond the way you think they would. If you've ever been in an intersection in life, you understand this. You're open to kindness, and you're open to care more than ever. You're more open to God's direction than you previously ever had been. These are sacred places, and Jesus invites you to show up at someone's intersection. Help them remove the yogurt container from their head. And help them when they were scared and blind to any hope. And Jesus did this masterfully. And when we look through the Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is where we read about Jesus' life. In one story, we meet a man named Nicodemus, a religious leader. Most of his contemporaries were anti-Jesus to some extent. But he had some different ideas of who Jesus was. And he was at this intersection of doubt and discovery. He's got questions. And Jesus meets with him at night to reassure him and answer his questions. Maybe you've got people in your life that are asking spiritual questions, but you're kind of afraid. Because you're afraid that you won't have all the answers. And God would invite you into those spaces, not to make things up, but just be authentically you. Be okay to say, I don't know. Let's look at it together. Maybe you've got people that around you that just need you to show up at their intersection. In Matthew 9, you see Jesus approached by a synagogue leader named Jairus, whose daughter is deathly sick. He's at the intersection of fear and despair. And Jesus is able to assure him and heal his daughter. In John 5, Jesus finds a lame man who's at the intersection of helplessness and hopelessness. And Jesus gives them both help and hope. John 8, we find a woman caught in adultery. She's at the intersection of guilt and shame. And Jesus offers her truth and grace. And so these intersections, they continually pop up. For me as a pastor, there's two main ceremonies I get to do in a person's life. I get to marry, and I get to bury. Weddings and funerals. And they're very different. Very different. As much as I love weddings, I don't have the same opportunities at a wedding. Because when I stand up here, when I speak in front of people at a wedding, I stand here and I get this couple that stand right in front of me. And I get up and I speak, and I'm speaking to them, but I can tell they're not listening to anything I'm saying. They're just staring at each other, so in love, and I start to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. So I'm standing up here going, wah, 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 and they're not hearing anything. But at a funeral, we slow down and we take inventory of our lives. We stop to consider our legacy. We stop to consider the afterlife. It's almost always an intersection. There's a parable, actually a couple parables I want to look at tonight found in Matthew 18. And they're really short parables that Jesus uses, but I want to look at these parables where Jesus explains the kingdom of heaven. And we talked about this before, but a parable is a story, a made-up story. Jesus would use this teaching technique to tell a story, again, made up, but it would have some sort of point to it, to explain something. So he starts using these parables to talk about the kingdom of heaven. Now, the kingdom of heaven is a physical place, but it's also any place where God is recognized as king, which includes your heart, your own spirit. So Jesus tells this parable to explain what heaven is like, and here's what he says. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. So Jesus says heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which leads to the question, who hides a treasure in a field? That we put our treasures, our finances in a bank or a safety deposit box or in a safe. But back in the day, this is what they would do. To safeguard your finances, your gold, your treasures, you buried them before you went off to war. You buried them in a field where only you would know where they are. That way, if another army came through and they raided your home, they wouldn't know where your treasure was. Only you knew. However, if you happened to die at war, only you knew where the treasure was buried. It would stay buried. And this is what seems to happen in this story. A man is a hired hand working in the field, and as he's working in this field, he comes across this treasure while kind of plowing that no one knew was there. The man who owns the field doesn't own it. It's not his. He doesn't even know it exists. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Ordinary day, ordinary job, ordinary field, and then everything changes. And so the man goes home, and he decides he's going to make the field owner an offer for his field. Probably more than the field was worth. And he sells everything he has to be able to get the cash to buy this field. Because he knows that field is worth so much more. But everyone thinks he's lost it. Like, what is he doing? Selling off his house, his livestock, everything he has to get this field? They don't understand. But he does. He knows this is a great deal. It's a great exchange. Some of you have done this. Not for a field, but you've traded in your old life. And you've exchanged it for what you found in Jesus. And your old friends and your family, at times, they don't understand. They're not sure what to make of it. But you do. Because you've discovered a new hope, a new joy, a treasure in a field. When we lived in Oshawa, that's where I grew up. At one point I was working for the school board, and Jen was a real estate agent. And at one point, I told this in a previous message, but we sold our house, a large house in a fairly wealthy neighborhood, to buy a townhome across the street from the school I was working in the roughest, probably the most ghetto area of Oshawa. And all of this with the idea that what we were going to do is we were going to buy this house or this townhouse in the roughest area, right in the heart of the worst part, and we were going to open it as a drop-in for teens in a very dangerous area. But after we did that, rumors went around my school by my coworkers. Why would they buy a place in this neighborhood? They knew exactly what the neighborhood was like because they worked there every day. And then I heard whispering, well, his wife's real estate business must have really tanked if they have to buy a house here. But we knew. What we saw was a neighborhood full of people at an intersection that needed to know Jesus. But they didn't. Then Jesus tells a second parable. In verse 45, he says this: again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant on the lookout for choice pearls. When he discovered a pearl of great value, he sold everything he owned and bought it. Two stories, similar thought. They both sold everything they owned to get the treasure. What's different? Well, the first one, he stumbles on it. It was accidental. It kind of just happened. The second one, he's searching, seeking, and he's looking for this pearl, and then he finds it. And what I find is that when it comes to intersections, spiritual intersections, people are in one of these two scenarios. In one case, something happened to them. Life went sideways. Something occurred that maybe they didn't see coming. Everything fell apart. In the midst of this tough time, they stumbled on a treasure they weren't looking for. And that's the story for many of you in this room. I hear it all the time. 6 months ago, for some of you, this is the last place you thought you'd be. You never thought you'd be in church. You never thought that Jesus was even relevant to your life. And you're now doing what you told yourself you'd never do. And yet here you are. And the reason you're here is because something in your life went sideways. And maybe you hit rock bottom. And in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your despair, you found a treasure. For others of you, you've been looking for a long time. You knew there was something better out there than what you had experienced. You knew there was a pearl of great value, but you hadn't found it yet. And it's here God met with you and you found what you were looking for. For some of you, you lost everything to your addiction. And now you're at an intersection. For some of you, your relationship is on the rocks, you don't know what to do. And you're at an intersection. I'd say to that, hang on, because the next series we're doing after this is on relationships, so hopefully that'll be helpful. For some of you, you've tried everything else, to fill a hole that only God can. And it's led you here. And this is your intersection. And for those of you not currently at an intersection, you will be at some point. But if you're not at an intersection, I want you to be looking for those who are. So before we're done, I want to give you 4 types of intersections people may find themselves at. Number 1 is the interest intersection. Interest intersection, this is where someone is asking a spiritual question, or you come across someone and they're sharing something somewhat vulnerable. They're kind of opening up in ways they never did before. Now, generally, guys are worse at these moments, these intersections. Not all guys, some girls too. But for us, it's uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable when another person is vulnerable. And so we crack a joke or we change the subject because we think we're actually rescuing that person from this really awkward situation they got themselves into. But the truth is, you're not helping them. Instead, lean into it. Show interest. And instead of feeling the need to be the person who has all the answers, ask more questions. Be interested. The more you show interest and ask questions, the more you become a person to go to in the intersections of life. The more you feel like you need to be the expert who has every answer, the more you lose the chance to actually help them. So be interested. The second intersection is intercession. The intersection. Say that 10 times fast. This is where you pray specifically for people. See, intercession is this thing where this is who we pray for. We go to God asking for something from God. But when we pray, we often intercede for us, for me. God, help me. God, guide me. God, do this for me. But intercession, how often do you pray for other people by name? See, it's one thing to pray. Some of you are like, I'm just going to pray for addicts everywhere. But it's another thing to pray for someone by name, zoomed in, one at a time. Because if you pray for someone specifically, what you will find is you become ultra sensitive to their needs, ultra aware of the pain, ultra aware of the intersections in their life, and you will see them differently. You can care for them differently. The third intersection is the interruptions intersection. When people's lives are interrupted, they're going through change, their lives become open to hearing from God. So I often have people come to me and say to me, Pastor, I got someone in my life and I'm really I care about them, and I want to share my faith with them, but I don't know how to do it or what to say. What I usually say to them is this: start by just praying for them. Not just so that they will be blessed, but that God will start to change your heart. Because the question is, do you wholeheartedly care about them? Will you still care about them when you reach out and invite them to church and they say no? Or do you see them as a challenge to get them to come to church and then I can move on to the next person? Or do you genuinely care about this person? Because if you do, you don't need to force your way into their life. You don't need to force your faith on them. You just walk with them. You care for them. And you wait for an intersection. Not because you're afraid, but because out of real relationship, you're going to be there when they come to an intersection. And maybe at that time, you've earned the right to point them in a direction. Lastly is the involvement intersection. Involvement is inconvenient at times. It's messy at times, and sometimes you risk getting stink on you. But it's in your backyard, and you're the person best positioned to help them take the yogurt container off their head. You're the answer to the prayer. You know, I love Hope Church nights. And one of the reasons I love it is we often get to meet people who are at an intersection. But our goal is always to point people to the one who made them, and who knows them better than themselves. I'm going to invite worship team to join me as we wrap this thing up.